Oh, is it hot in here or is it just me?
You're smoking.
Thanks, buddy. Mixing. Mixing is a very complex puzzle where the final shape is the same for everybody, but the solutions are radically different. I mean, what is mixing? Take a look at this fan here, and this represents our 180-degree spectrum of sound. We have everything from left to right, center, so we pan our instruments throughout this different spectrum. We do these very fine volume adjustments at specific frequencies. We call that EQ. Well, here's the thing. Just because you have an instrument panned dead center and you do a little boost to its frequencies doesn't mean there aren't lingering frequencies from that instrument sort of lingering here on the sides of your mix. And as your project builds up over time, those frequencies are ganging up and likely is what is causing that muddiness or lack of clarity that you keep getting in your mixes. Well, there is a remedy to that problem, and it's called mid-side EQing, and that's what I'm talking about today. I'm the Lonely Rocker. This is I Don't Have a Band, and welcome to my home studio. All right, so quickly off the top, I'm going to treat this mid-side EQ tutorial a little bit differently than other videos I've seen. In other videos, I've seen guys just rip their mixes apart and then showing you what mid-side EQing is doing to the different tracks. But what I want to do in this tutorial is I want to show you what mid-side EQing actually looks like. And to do that, I'm going to use a spectrum analyzer. Now, if you missed my video on how to use a spectrum analyzer, I highly recommend you check it out. It works very well with the techniques that I'm going to demonstrate in this video. And I'll tell you something, you know, I'm a home studio guy like many of you, and I struggled, you know, finding clarity and getting rid of mud in my mixes. Well, the day I discovered how to use a spectrum analyzer combined with mid-side EQing was the day my mixes started sounding really, really good, closer and closer to professional mixes. So stick with me on this one. You check out the two videos, and I'm certain that's going to be the eureka moment for you. Anyways, that spectrum analyzer, one of them, Voxengo Span Plus. The cool thing about this meter is it allows you not only to see all of the frequencies in a stereo spectrum, but you can split it into mid and side so you can actually see them on a graph. And there's a very specific way a mix is supposed to look on a meter like this. That's what that other video is about, so make sure to check it out. So I'm not going to really tell you how to use it in this video other than to demonstrate some examples here. But there's a very specific relationship between mid and side, and that's what a spectrum analyzer will show you, and it will tie nicely with this tutorial. So what is mid-side EQ? We're all familiar with the concept of panning. We can take an instrument, use our pan knob, and place it anywhere within the stereo spectrum that we want very easily. We just turn that knob left or right. When EQing, we assume any frequencies we boost, for example, are limited to where this instrument is sitting in the stereo spectrum. This is incorrect. Let's say this is 1K from one of our instruments sitting in the middle of our stereo spectrum. Using an EQ in stereo mode, any boost we make at 1K will actually bring up elements of this 1K frequency much wider than we realize. While the bulk of the frequencies may be where we want them, there are low-lying elements of this frequency that exist beyond that point. If you do more 1K boosts on more instruments panned throughout your mix, these 1K frequencies start to build up. Now, imagine this happening at many different frequencies throughout your mix. This is why a mix can sound muddy and lack clarity. All of these unnecessary frequencies keep piling up on top of each other. A mid-side EQ looks at the stereo spectrum much differently. It allows you to be more precise with your EQ boosts and cuts by focusing its attention in the middle or the sides of your mix. Let's take our same 1K frequency. Using an EQ set to mid, the boost is now more focused to the center of the mix. Or, if set to side, the boost will occur along the sides of the mix, keeping the middle clearer. That's it. In fact, we can boost and cut the same frequency at the same time. Here's another 1K boost set to mid. And then we can cut the same 1K frequency, but this time set to side. This allows us to clean out those unwanted 1K frequencies on the outside while retaining our desired EQ correction in the middle. And of course, you can boost the sides and cut the mids as well. This is just the basics of mid-side EQing, but if you can grasp this concept, you will start to breathe fresh air into your mixes. All right, the next step in understanding mid-side EQing is knowing where to find it. Now, sorry for those of you not on Logic, I am using Logic here as an example, but I'm going to show you a stock EQ, and then I've got a couple of third-party EQs here as an example to give you an idea where to find it. It's really not that difficult, and I'm sure whatever EQ you're using in your DAW, there'll be one there that'll give you the mid-side option. But using the stock EQ, this is the channel EQ in Logic, if you look down here in the bottom, it says processing, and it's giving you a choice of stereo, left only, right only, mid only, and side only. Now we're talking about mid side, but to using left or right technically is using one side, but just for keep this simple, we're going to deal with mid and side. So we can switch it here to mid. Now this whole plugin is now mid mode. So any adjustments we make, let's say we do a little boost here at 1K, and tighten the Q a little bit, this adjustment is going to happen only in the middle of our mix. It's not going to have an effect on the sides of our mix. So what we could do, unfortunately with this channel EQ, we can't do mid and side adjustments within the same instance of the plugin, but all we'd have to do here is just load a second instance of the channel EQ after it, and then we can switch that to side, and then we could cut all the same frequency on the sides, and that'll clean up any mud that's starting to build up on the side. So that's how we would do it here with a channel EQ inside Logic. But if we're using third-party EQs, a more expensive option is the very popular Pro Q3 from FabFilter. Now the great thing about this one is that we can actually mix side and mid adjustments on the same EQ curve. So right here, there's a little pull away menu here, stereo placement. I could set that, for example, to mid, and let's say we'll do something in the highs here. We'll do a little boost, and I could change that to sides, and that there's a little S there. So we're now making adjustments on the same EQ curve, so we don't have to load additional instances of the plugin. You pay quite a premium for that feature on this plugin, as it's not cheap. So, but you definitely can achieve the same thing with your stock plugins, but certainly not a deal breaker if it doesn't just load 2 instances of the plugin. And a cheaper option here, you've got the Waves F6. Simply, you just choose the node that you're working on here. It defaults to stereo mode, but down here on the side it says mid or sides. And actually, you can mix it in this one. You know, this one's already set to side. Let's say we want to change this one to mid. So we actually have side and mid adjustments within the same plugin. So that's pretty helpful right there. Anyways, a couple options there, whether you're using third-party EQs or you're using the EQ that comes stock with your DAW. All right, this is the part of the show where I reveal the mid-side frequencies to you. So what I've done here is I've got a simple kick drum loop, and the kick drum is pan dead center. And I've got the Span Plus plugin here that's going to reveal some information for us, and I'll explain. So now if we listen to it, just standard kick drum, we've panned this thing dead center. Now if we look at the graph here, everything that we're seeing in green is actually the mids. This is your mid frequencies, and the yellow here is actually information that's happening on the side. So right here we can see that even though we've panned the kick drum dead center, there's a little low end rumble here that's lingering on the sides of our mixes. Now, you're probably not going to hear this, and depending on the room you're in, if you're in a home studio, likely, you know, with not good bass response from your speakers or in the room, you likely are not hearing this, but right there is the source of the mud in your frequencies, especially as that starts to build up. Now, using a standard EQ, I'm going to use the Pro Q3 here, but like I said, you can use a stock EQ. As long as there's a mid-side processing, you can do the exact same thing. So for example, I'm in stereo mode as the plugin's default to stereo. And let's say we want to boost the frequencies around 70, 75 hertz here, and I'll just do a boost. Now watch what happens to here. See these side frequencies? They're also coming up. And again, we're trying to really boost that thump so we can really hear that kick drum. But what's happening is we're bringing up a lot of mud on the sides of our mixes. So let me bring that back down. So now what I'll do, using here, I can change this to, we'll change that to mid, for example, and let's do the same thing. So as you can see, we're boosting the mid frequencies of that kick drum at around 75 hertz, and those side frequencies are pretty much staying where they were before. We haven't affected them at all. So now we haven't gotten rid of them, but we've boosted the frequencies of that kick drum at our desired frequency without bringing up the sides, which would, I said, cause a lot of mud in our projects. Now, using the same plugin, I can create another node here, and I'm going to change this to side. And I'm going to cut at the very same frequency, and watch what happens. We've just gotten rid of all of the mud. So that 70, 75 hertz, we've got the really thumping bass. We've panned it to the center. By looking at the Span Plus plugin here, we can see we've got lots of green here. That's all happening in the middle of our mix. And those yellows that were there before, that was representing that low end rumble, you know, hiding in the sides of our mixes, is now completely gone. And right there is the basics of mid-side mixing. And that's why using a meter like this can really, really help you. Now, here's an example where we're trying to get a snare drum to sit in the mix, and there's a couple things that we want to do. We want to make sure that meat of the snare is present, but that initial whack, we find ourselves usually doing a boost in the upper registers, and we can see here on this snare drum where we probably would be looking somewhere between, you know, 5, 6, 7K where we'd want to do that boost. So, as I demonstrated before, let's do this in stereo mode. And let's say we want to boost the meat of that snare. Well, we're going to bring it up, and what's going to happen? this snare is pan dead center, but look, there's those side frequencies lurking in the weeds here, starting to pile up there. And again, that's an ingredient in our mud mixture. So we don't want to do that. Same thing, you know, sometimes I know a snare drum, trying to get a snare drum to sit in the mix, we want to really feel the whack of that snare. So what are we doing? We're looking for those high end frequencies. In this case, let's say I'm around 6.5, 7K here. I'll even tighten that up a little bit. And as I start to bring this up, well, again, here's our mid frequencies, but look, there's that yellow. There's those side frequencies starting to come up along the edges of our mixes. Again, adding to that mud brew, which is creating all the lack of clarity and mud in our mixes. So what would we do in this case? Same thing as I did with the bass drum. We can actually set another node here or use a different instance of the plugin. Like I said, you can do this with 2 different instances. We'll set this to side. We'll do a cut here. And let's just clean out all that mud. Take a look at our graph. Those side frequencies are now gone. If you do that with every instrument in your mix, you're really going to start to hear that clarity coming into your mix. Same thing with the bottom end here. You know, we'll do a little boost here. We'll make sure that's in our mid mode. And then same thing on the side. I'm going to do a cut here. Let's change that to side. And I'm going to pull that down. Now, if you listen carefully in headphones, you can actually hear that. If you really boost the side frequencies, you'll hear it ringing on the outside of your mix. But this is why I really believe in using a spectrum analyzer, because if you're not clearly hearing some of these frequencies, you're not going to necessarily know that they're there. Now, something really, really, really important that I need you to understand is that if we used a graph like this for our whole mixing session and just technically place instruments where they should be, cleaned out the mid and side frequencies as we desired, without really listening to the tracks, well, that's not going to be a solution either, because I've said many times that the most important tool that you have is your ears, and we want each instrument to sound good. So yes, we can go with the meter and make all of those corrections, and technically our wave looks perfect and everything is where it should be, but the mix still doesn't sound right. It's a careful balance between shaping the tone of each of your instruments and being mindful of the mid and side so that everything is placed properly and know exactly what you need to do to clear out all that mud to really bring in that definition and clarity to mixes that you've really been searching for. All right, so lastly, I want to talk about something, a tone that's a little more complex. I'm going to look at some heavy guitars. Now, I typically will double track my guitars and I'll pan them really hard left and right. Now, in the last couple of examples, I showed you how you can get rid of the side information completely. Now, that's not really the game. When you're using a meter like this, you want to use it as a reference point. And as I said before, that you want to make sure that you're not just destroying the tone of that track. I mean, the goal is not really to get rid of all of those frequencies on the side. I mean, you may want to have some there, but being able to monitor them in real time as you're mixing and seeing where some of your issues are building up is a really invaluable tool. Now, I don't want to make the game be like, well, I got to pull all those extra frequencies on the side because you don't want to deaden your mix either. But that's why using your ear in combination with using that meter can really help you find where those issues are and clean them up. Now, a good example here is electric guitars. Now, I've got these double tracked and they're panned hard left and right. Now, what I've done an extreme correction here where I've boosted the side frequencies and then I've done the opposite cut in the mid-range. Now, let's take a look at our meter in this case. Now, if you notice here, there's a bit of red starting to surface here in our meter. That's because our side frequencies are peaking up above our mid frequencies. Now, I don't want to go too deep into that because I do talk about that in the Spectrum Analyzer video, but that's something that we actually don't want to see. And these guitars are really big sounding that there's really no way I'm going to get rid of those mid frequencies. That's not what I'm trying to do here. So if I actually fix this correction, just tighten the cues a little bit of a cut. Now, we are working at solo here, but in context of a whole mix, if you were making an adjustment like this, and let's say you had this meter on your master bus and you started to notice that around 3K, 4K, that there was some extra mid frequencies that were sort of causing a bit of issues here, you could start to do some cutting here on your guitar. And if you're doing this right from the beginning and you're doing mid-side EQing in all of your tracks and you're monitoring your progress right from the beginning, you're going to see those issues starting to pile up. And in a case like the guitars here, I'm not going to try and just completely get rid of all the mid frequencies. That's not what I'm trying to do. But if I sense by looking at the meter that there's some issues happening around 3K where I need to lose some of those mid frequencies, and I could say, well, these guitars are really sucking up a lot of air in this mix, well, I could go into a mid-side mid-side EQ and start making some cuts just to see if that starts to clean up some of the issues that I'm having. And that's how you really need to start looking at it. I mean, don't put an EQ on your master bus and think you're going to mid-side EQ your problems away. No. You want to have a mid-side EQ handy on all your tracks as you need them. And if you're using a meter like Voxengo Span Plus, you can sort of see this all happening in real time and make good tonal choices. You know, you got to make your tracks, each track sound good, not to compensate for the meter, but you need to find that balance, but being technically accurate as well, because that's where you're going to find the issues, and that's how you're going to clean up all of that mud in your mixes, and it's really going to go a long way to making your mix sounding a lot better. Well, I hope these visual examples have really painted a picture for you and show you what mid-side EQing looks like. I mean, if you've been sitting there practicing your mixes and just getting frustrated because you've got all this extra mud and lack of clarity, well, now hopefully you understand. I mean, those frequencies are there. Just because you can't hear them doesn't mean they're not causing problems with your mixes. And really understanding the concept of mid-side EQing can really be a game changer for you, and especially combining that with utilizing a meter like Voxengo Span Plus to really see where your issues are. Those two things, and I've told you before and I'm going to tell you again, that was really the two things that I can identify that really started to change the game with my mixes. It's something that I practice for every project. I've got mid-side EQing as a rule for every single track, and I'll also do it on the master bus for a final little tweak at the end, and I've got my meters on all the time. So make sure to check out the Spectrum Analyzer video as well, and these two will work really well together, and hopefully that's going to set you on your way to finally getting better mixes. Well, if you're new to this channel and found this tutorial super hot, I hope I've earned a subscribe. I've got a ton of content on this channel, a lot of it revolving around this home studio, geared to the home studio enthusiast and the home recording musician, with videos to hopefully help make your home studio life better and cooler. So perhaps you'll click that subscribe button and come along for the ride. If you really want to support this channel, I am on Patreon. Links to everything I've discussed and some things I haven't are in the description below. And above all else, I hope I'll see you again in another video. As always, if you have any questions, let me know in the comments. And please like, subscribe, and ring that bell to stay up to date. Remember, you don't need a band to rock and roll. There are a lot of great musical projects you can do by yourself, right from your own home. I hope to see you again next time.